Thanks, Camille. Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Clerk, could you please call roll?
There we go. Thank you, Chair. Yes, will do. Carrie Aquino Hernandez,
Here.
Abamel Chavez Hernandez, Florence Simon, Chair Naomi Iwasaki,
Present.
Martha Armis Kelly. All right. That concludes the roll call. Chair, we do not have quorum for this meeting. Won't be able to take any action, but we can now proceed. If you'd like, I can go through the webinar logistics very quickly.
Thank you. Please do.
Great. Welcome, everyone, to the November 17th, 2025 Interagency Transportation Equity Advisory Subcommittee meeting on data implementation. This subcommittee's focus will be on elevating diverse and historically marginalized voices and will advise the California Transportation Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and California Department of Transportation on how to achieve meaningful outcomes in transportation equity, environmental justice, and equitable economic opportunities, especially as related to transportation planning and programming. The meeting agenda is located on the Commission's website at www.catc.ca.gov. Any document created for this committee can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at transportationeac@dot.ca.gov, and we'll have them returned to you as quickly as possible. American Sign Language translation is being provided for this meeting. You should see them on your screen. Live closed captioning is also available. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Speakers, for accessibility purposes, we ask that you please state your name prior to speaking. Presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. Please remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our translating services adequate time for accurate translations. Members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as a part of each item at this meeting. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of your screen, where you'll find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as you reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you, and staff will let you know when it's your turn to make a comment. Alternately, you may use the Q&A tab to submit your comment, and committee staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please do your best to be concise. We ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on a single topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Clerk. And I didn't hear her respond when you called roll call, but I do see that member Armis Kelly has joined still. Welcome.
Yes,
So I
I saw
know.
that she had joined, so thank you for calling that out.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Good morning.
Morning. So I believe next we'll conduct our land acknowledgement. I was hoping that I could offer this opportunity to read the land acknowledgement to other committee members, but of course that would be contingent upon, is there a slide that we can pull up virtually so that someone may volunteer to read? And if that slide's not available, I'm happy to read them from my notes.
Yes, there is. Let me see. Are you able to see this all right?
Yes, I can. So again, if any of the members would like to volunteer to read this, I'd open the floor to that now. Happy to do it. Just didn't want to be talking for most of the meeting. But I'll start. We acknowledge that the land that we now call California is the ancestral lands of the over 109 nations, tribes, and peoples. The indigenous peoples of this area have a deep reciprocal relationship with the land as its original stewards. Their ways, methods, and traditions have contributed to California's rich biodiversity and have impacted the transportation network for the state. We stand with Indigenous communities and are committed to partnering and advocating for a more equitable and sustainable future. Our transportation network not only connects us to families, friends, work, and leisure, it connects us to our past and future. We embrace our past with a future commitment to inclusiveness and equity for everyone who calls this state home. Thank you, Camille, for sharing that. And now I'll ask the clerk if there is anyone from the public wishing to make public comment on items not on our agenda.
Excuse me. I just wanted to recognize a tribal recognition here for where I'm at.
Of course.
Hi, this is Martha Armis Kelly, member of the IEIC, and I just want to recognize the coastal Miwok here in Sausalito, where I'm calling from, and just giving recognition to the space of the Little Willow people, which are also the human group, the Wheat Men. And I just wanted to say that it's been a very beautiful and introspective view of how Caltrans is working on coastal areas. I was here today, and because of the rains, they have what they call king tides, and they come in and really take over the coastal waters, the areas here, the inland ports, and the way people, I guess, maneuver and navigate. And so I just wanted to send a shout out to Caltrans because on the short time that I've been here, they have a really good system for helping folks be able to overcome some of those mitigations that are needed from the tides. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Armis Kelly. If there are no other member comments, can we ask the clerk to check if there's anyone from the public wishing to make comment?
Thank you, Chair. Not seeing any requests from the public at this time to make a comment.
Thank you. So I believe because we don't have quorum today, we will skip the item to adopt the meeting minutes from from August. And we will go to our topic discussion, which is a presentation from staff on the Caltrans Equity Index use cases presentation, as well as discussion. So I'll have Macy and Henry from the California Director's Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs and Office of Sustainability to please present.
All right, thank you. So let me try to share my screen first. Okay, is anyone able to see my screen? All right. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to share the progress we've made as far as the EQI use cases, and we'll walk you through the key use cases we've been working on, and then we'll open it up for brainstorming session to explore how this tool can be most useful in your areas. We also welcome your feedback on how we can continue improving and refining the EQI tool going forward. And I just wanted to note that here, this is just the beginning of our conversation. So we'll be looking forward to continue this discussion in the future sessions. And your insight today are incredibly valuable. And we are eager to hear your thoughts and ideas. And before we begin, I want to apologize for my voice today. I am getting over a cold, but I'll do my best to speak clearly. So today, let's move on to next slide. So today, we are going to walk you through our current use cases, CSIS, TIPSIS, SB960, and some other use cases that we've been working so far. And with that, I'll hand it over to Henry to walk you through CSIS, and then I'll speak about TIPSs and other use cases.
Thanks, Basie. So CSIS is the Caltrans System Investment Strategy, and it's generally the department's investment framework for discretionary funding. So both, how we prioritize projects for funding pots that we control, but mostly how we nominate projects to other funding pots. So for example, competitive programs run by the California Transportation Commission, or in some cases, federal programs. And there's a lot of different investment strategies out there that we kind of modeled this off of at different state DOTs, but CSIS really, at least the quantitative metrics, are really designed to measure a project's alignment to the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, which is California's Transportation Climate Action Plan. The CSIS itself includes 11 quantitative metrics, or that are the CAPTI alignment metrics, all of which tie back to specific CAPTI principles. And 2 of these metrics are directly derived from the equity index, both in sort of concept and the actual data sets they use. And so these 2 metrics are first the disadvantaged communities, or DAC, access to destinations metric. And this metric measures the percent change in access to both jobs and non-work destinations for low-income individuals in AB 1550 low-income communities. So consistent with that low-income definition in the equity index. And it is worth pointing out here that the equity index sort of defines at a baseline level where there are access deficiencies. So places, lower income communities, tribal communities, where there is a lack of access to destinations via non-auto modes. So that's what the equity index does. And then CSIS is really intended to assess, okay, if we're going to do something to the transportation or land use system, so like build a project, how would that project move the needle on those access deficiencies? So that's one metric. And then the other side of the sort of coin there is disadvantaged communities, or DAC, traffic impacts. So with the DAC traffic impacts metric, we look at the change in DAC-weighted, truck-weighted traffic exposure. And so this metric essentially looks at, if we're going to build a transportation project, what's going to be the change in traffic volumes along the project corridor, and then in some cases alternative corridors as well, measured both in terms of car traffic and truck traffic. Because if you go back to the EQI methodology, we sort of weight truck traffic higher than car traffic because it has greater burdens associated with it. So we measure that impact both in terms of the change in traffic volumes, and then how many residents in disadvantaged communities are living near that expected traffic impact per the EQI. So with both of these metrics, we're essentially doing very specific project level measurement of 2 of the primary parts of EQI, both, where is there a lack of benefit, and where are projects, ideally, adding more benefit in the form of additional access to destinations, and then ensuring that projects aren't exacerbating existing traffic burdens in the form of additional traffic exposure. So that's really how CSIS ties to the EQI. And a few notes that are important on this are, these metrics are fairly specific and difficult to run. And so, we apply these to all the discretionary programs that we are involved in. And we ask for really specific project information from project applicants, where their project's located, some of this data around traffic volumes, traffic speeds and stuff like that, so we can perform the calculations. But we sort of assume the responsibility of actually doing the analysis. And then we use that analysis for project prioritization, and can also make it available to applicants for, to kind of help tell the story of their project or better understand the equity implications of their project. But at the end of the day, it's something we're assuming responsibility for. And that sort of contrasts to what I'll talk about next. So Macy, if you want to go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the draft EQI analytical tool. And this was really designed kind of as a follow-up item to CSIS, because CSIS we think is very good, and it's kind of the most in-depth version of doing project analysis with the EQI, but it is difficult to operationalize and not really available to all project analysis. And so what we wanted to do was build a tool that was very easy to run, didn't really require work with our team, and could provide kind of quick sketch planning analysis of what expected project impact would be. And so the draft EQI project analysis tool, or EQI analytical tool, is a web-based sort of mapping application that's really designed to provide kind of quick answers in terms of what EQI conditions are located around the project area and how the project is anticipated to move the needle on those EQI issues. But to allow users to do so in a way that is much easier to operationalize and doesn't really require a lot of technical skills or understanding. So the tool methodology essentially works as follows. There's a web-based mapping application, and project sponsors or applicants can provide really basic information, essentially just where the project is located. So drawing in, lines and points showing the project location, and then simple information about what kind of project it is. And so at this point, the project types are mapped to the Caltrans shop definitions, because that was kind of one of the primary use cases of the tool. But we could generalize this to kind of be for any project type. And shop is fairly comprehensive. So, if you're thinking of a specific project type, it's likely captured there. And then once that project information is submitted, the tool does basic GIS analysis. So essentially looking at the project location, drawing a buffer, and looking, intersecting the EQI census blocks and coming up with summary statistics. So it comes up with summary statistics for all the EQI indicators, as well as population and income and things like that. And then the tool itself produces a report where these summary statistics are compared to the EQI thresholds to determine what the baseline issues are in the project area. So for example, you could use the tool, draw your project in, and maybe the project is a bike lane and its intended purpose is to increase access to destinations for folks. And then the tool would be able to tell you, okay, within this project area, it's a low income community and there's major gaps in bicycle access to destinations. And since we know that this is a bike lane that's going to reduce traffic stress, that's going to increase access to destinations for residents in this area. It's not going to tell you exactly how much access to destinations is going to increase, unlike the CSIS metrics where we go in and can calculate a pretty precise estimate there, but it directionally at least can tell you these baseline issues are present and the project is addressing them to some degree. So that's kind of the idea. The tool provides a high-level assessment to determine what impacts, if any, the project component would have on the relevant EQI issue. So that's just a quick overview of the EQI analytical tool. This, in it of itself is not necessarily a use case, but this tool is really designed to be applicable to lots of our other use cases that aren't CSIS, or use cases where we at Caltrans headquarters take on the analysis responsibilities for projects. With that, I'll pass it back to Macy to discuss some of our other use cases. Thanks.
Thank you, Henry. All right, so I'll talk about TIPSIS, like EQI integration into transportation planning, scoping information sheet. In summary, we call it TIPSIS. So what is TIPSIS? TIPSIS is a Caltrans pre-planning tool or document used to document project costs, schedule, needs, and opportunities. Right now, so it used to include other equity tools like calendar screen and other healthy place indexes, but now includes a section focused specifically on equity consideration directing to EQI. EQI provides a consistent way to identify underserved or disproportionately impacted communities early in the project development process, and integrating EQI ensures equity is not treated as an afterthought, but is embedded into project scoping from the very beginning. And it will align with state priorities, like CAPTI goals by aligning with statewide climate equity and sustainability objectives. And the other benefit will be incorporating EQI in the early stages leads to more informed, inclusive, and ultimately more effective transportation projects that better meet community needs, basically. And so EQI highlights communities that have been historically underserved or overburdened, providing a clearer understanding of where equity needs are. And support for TIPSIS section 2-2, using the EQI analytical tool, as Henry just mentioned, planners can answer key questions like, are we affecting underserved communities by identifying underserved communities using the analytical tool? And then what mobility needs or access gaps exist in these areas? And then with responding to this question, they can provide or affect the scope of those projects. This will bring data-driven insights directly into the TIPSIS equity section. And EQI encourages planners to identify equity considerations early, as I mentioned, and promote equitable outcomes from the very beginning of the project developments. And just a side note, as far as the EQI questions in the TIPSIS and the timeline of the new template, EQI questions have already been added to section 2 of the TIPSIS document, which is a required section through this document. And as for the update timeline, the TIPSIS template is currently being shared internally for final feedback, and the final updated template is planned for release in January 2026. And the use of the new template will be required for the 2028 shop cycle. The 2020 shop cycle is now under process. It has begun from June, but the whatever has been remaining will be required to use the new template, basically. And also, we are still exploring opportunities to evaluate the EQI's impacts, not only within like TIPSIS or planning, but also with other programs across the department, such as safety and SB1. We expect to develop a consistent evaluation process in the near future. And we need to be intentional about evaluating impacts at different phases throughout the life cycle of the project, because in Caltrans usually the projects are long, up to 10 years sometimes. Yes, I see a hand is raised. Yes, Marta, please go ahead.
Ms. Macy, I had a question for you in regards
Uh,
to the new standards that they are imposing through the EPA, where they're really not recognizing the burdens of, environmental impacts or climate impacts, as far as how we are creating those planning matrix. Do you feel that that's going to impact your evaluation in the process of this thesis, as far as like the strength that is used to I guess, create the narrative for said argument in regards to the need for climate support and inclusion?
I think Henry can respond to this
Yeah,
question.
yeah. Martha, are you referring to federal EPA
Mm.
guidance as of late?
Yes, because,
Okay.
in the conversations that we've had recently with, interagencies, and even in our own work, we're looking at how, now we're kind of waiting and baiting for time as far as what can we argument, what can we use as a basis for argument. So before we had the standardization of understanding these are the emissions that we're trying to reduce, or these are the standards that we're trying to create because there is such a burden. And climate impacts are clearly a part of that narrative. And I'm wondering, does that impact you at all in the way you're able to present the data and the information? Because the data now is somewhat not, it's not diminished, but the weight of that data, it can be perceived differently. So I'm just kind of wondering, how have you mitigated that? And if you had mitigate that at all?
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. That's a good question. For CSIS, I would say it hasn't really impacted it that much at this point. I mean, we have, like I said, the DAC traffic impacts metric, which is sort of a climate metric, but is really getting at like where are the localized sort of equity impacts of transportation emissions. We also in CSIS we have a VMT metric as well, which is much more focused on sort of broader, greenhouse gas emissions of projects and climate impacts. So we have both of those things. Those were put in place in CSIS prior to the current federal administration and are still there and are still supported by our leadership. So that's really coming into play in terms of how Caltrans prioritizes our projects for investment to various programs. So at the state level, it's probably not going to be a huge impact. I think the example that really would maybe beg that question more is like if we're applying to federal programs, what that would look like. Um, some projects really choose to like in their applications talk a lot about the CSIS metrics and stuff, but at this point there's no part in the process that really requires that. All CSIS is really doing is it's a framework for like what will Caltrans headquarters support in terms of project nominations, and so um, ideally, really the point of it is that we're just not going to be supporting projects that aren't aligned to our state climate and equity goals to begin with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Yep.
All right. Moving on, SB 960 requirements. So SB 960 directs Caltrans to establish a clear definition of underserved communities for inclusive engagement related to complete street projects under the SHOP program. And EQI's underserved community layer provides a consistent statewide method for identifying low-income communities and tribal communities, aligning directly with SB 960 requirements. And then benefit of using EQI will ensure consistent, transparent, and equitable identification of underserved communities across all districts and inclusive engagement and outreach for complete street projects. And then next, so these are the EQI use cases under development like after we shared these slides with you, we had so much progress. So in my talking points here, I'll walk you through some of those progress that we've made after sharing these slides. So for the SB1 use case, right now it's under detailed development. Our immediate focus is reviewing indicators and tools in Section A of the Transportation Equity Supplement, which is a guidance for the SB1 program applicants. And then we are going to update EQI language and recommend EQI use in SB1 application submittal. We are planning to analyze both successful and unsuccessful cycle 4 applications under SB1 that used EQI to identify the gaps and improvements for future guidance. We are also exploring long-term opportunities such as integrating EQI into GenAI tools to support future SB1 application analysis. Next, maintenance use case. This new use case is focused on integrating EQI into maintenance decision making to ensure equity considerations guide statewide maintenance priorities. We are exploring how EQI data can be combined with the Integrated Maintenance Management System, IMMS, and asset condition ratings to identify where maintenance needs overlap with high equity priority areas. Current work centered on understanding existing maintenance databases and alignment with EQI. Safety, the traffic safety investigation branch in Caltrans is using EQI to proactively identify risk factors contributing to crash patterns statewide. EQI values are now incorporated into systemic safety monitoring program alongside census data to screen the network for locations where crashes are likely to occur. And also road safety infrastructure plan, RSIP methodologies are also using EQI to identify corridors for systemic safety enhancement and systemic risk factors. And then again, we are exploring ways to GenAI operationalize RSIP methodology by measuring systemic safety analysis with EQI insights and enabling more efficient and data-driven safety planning. And then last one, EQI integration into Caltrans engagement portal. The goal here is to integrate EQI data into Caltrans engagement portal to increase transparency and help better understand how equity considerations inform transportation decisions. Right now, this use case is under development, and we are working with the portal program manager and IT in our department to make that happen, basically. And then with that, I have some questions for the members here. Before I move on to the question, is there any questions on any of the use cases that I just walked you through? Okay, I'm seeing none, so I'll move on to the first question. So as I mentioned, your feedback on these questions will be valuable for us to like we can better understand how you are going to use the tool as external user in your program or your areas, and then how we can make improvement in our tools to be better useful for your programs. So our first question here, if you were designing a local use case for the equity index, what transportation decisions or challenges would you focus on? Go ahead, Naomi.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. This is really great to see this tool being applied to kind of practice applications. So thank you for this description. I think when I think of utilizing equity tools and especially geographic-based equity tools, I wonder how they can be best used to inform transportation project prioritization and trade-off decisions that many agencies and jurisdictions make. There's a finite amount of resources, a finite amount of capacity and manage projects. And so is there a way that the equity index helpful in informing prioritization, by measuring impact or by integrated into other existing project readiness assessments, that are based on funding or are based on, project phase and readiness or political and community support? And just curious, I guess, if staff has a thoughts or considerations about how the equity index prioritization conversations?
So go ahead, please. Martha, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I thought you were going to answer a question first.
Oh, I can take this one. I would say we have it very much integrated into the like project prioritization and kind of trade-off analysis in like thesis, which I mentioned, but maybe one question for the group would be, there is a limited usefulness of that because thesis really is only applied to like these discretionary funding programs that Caltrans is nominating projects to, and it's typically pretty large projects. Um, so, I mean, I think in terms of where we apply it, it's applied to a really kind of the really critical projects that both can do really good or potentially harmful things for equity outcomes. Um, but there is, all these smaller projects, both at Caltrans and just like projects that local agencies are primarily working on. And so maybe a place to really explore is like how the tool could be modified or made more useful for example, for like local agencies doing their own prioritization efforts, kind of independent of Caltrans. That would be one maybe thing I would think of.
Thank you.
Uh, I just wanted to say, like, when you're looking at local jurisdictions and the use of something like this, would there be an ability to embed kind of like a matrix or even a framework for understanding possible outcomes of a said project, like understanding, like when you were talking about risk analysis and how in certain areas there's like a potential for crash, and you're looking at a bigger corridor, but I'm thinking about smaller regional perspectives and areas that have been of impact. Could that be tailored for like the local use in that sense? And if it would be, um, one thing that I find that is really important for using these types of tools is colors and a lot of hands-on opportunities to kind of move around the the cursor, I guess, to kind of show, to be able to express and present that data in a way that's more like visual than just numbers. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think so. I guess to 2 points to 2 parts of your question. The first one of like, could this be used for kind of smaller local projects? I think so. I think the big thing right now that would need to be changed or at least kind of thought of differently is, EQI does utilize thresholds to some extent, and those thresholds are specifically designed for kind of statewide use. And, a lot of the indicators are normalized in a way where it's not really a huge issue where you're located, like it's kind of normalized to the region already. But at least in the safety use case, that would be one where like, if you're using the tool specifically for intersection level crashes in smaller neighborhoods, and that's kind of the scope of use compared to, highway corridors or something, um, that threshold for significance might be a lot lower than what we currently have. And so at this point, that's guidance we've given to folks, especially in local agencies that have wanted to use EQI of like, you can just go in and set that threshold to whatever you want based on the conditions in your area. If you believe it should be different. And so I think that's definitely a possibility here, and is a very just simple thing to do. On the second question, in terms of like visual communication of the tool, I think that's stuff we're really going to be exploring for just the next update we make on, how to make the tool graphically more um, useful in terms of conveying information. So, things like more charts and things like that. We've kind of done that a little bit in the EQI report and the draft analytical tool, but we could definitely do more.
Like
Oh,
drop downs help a lot, like where you can have, so like when you're looking at like GIS mapping, for example, and you're looking at the region and you're saying, oh, this intersection would be of great impact if we were able to do this in this area, but however, it would cause this. So real scenarios that folks could see, like if you move the cog this way, this will affect this. That kind of real time information, I think, is important because folks on the norm that are not trained, and when we're speaking to communities and understanding projects, for example, if you were to come out and speak to a community, the numbers that you speak are of consequence in the sense that they reflect on lives or impacts, right? But I think that it'd be more, I guess, concrete and more tangible for folks to be able to see how this could potentially be used to make better decisions. And I think that's the important thing for folks to be able to understand that you're using this to make better choices for better outcomes. And this is why. So more user friendly.
yeah. Yeah, thanks, Martha. Those are good points. I would say, like, yeah, on the safety thing, on the safety one and some of the other indicators, we can look into that. On the access to destinations mapping, we do have the tool we actually use. You draw in, you model your project and then you can draw isochrones, and that's, I would say, the closest we currently get to like the ideal way of communicating some of this information, where in pretty much real time you can see, okay, because of this project, here's the additional space geographically that you're able to access. And we found that to be a pretty powerful tool.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, those are great points. And I think, yeah, now that you mentioned that, uh, point, I think we can think of maybe the reports resulted from the analytical tool, Henry, that we have, like the column that where it says how the project will impact. That could be like visually seen. That's one
Yeah.
option. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I would add, if to anyone on the call, if if you find other tools, they don't even have to be transportation tools, but just
Mhm.
any tools or reports or things that we feel like, or you feel like, do a really good job with that sort of graphic communication of policy data, feel free to send them our way, because um, it's always good to get inspiration for this stuff from
Yeah,
existing practice.
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, thank you, Henry. All right, Carrie and Naomi, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple of questions for how there may be gaps in how equity shows up in this tool, and seeing how we can identify Indigenous communities, folks who have mobility issues and disability needs, and also for unincorporated areas like city islands and rural areas. And then for access, I was wondering if there's a way to show connectivity to Indigenous tourism, like, important sacred sites, parks, reservation, other points of interest as that industry is growing as well. Thank you.
I can take a few of those. I think let's start with the sort of, I think you'd said, sort of city island access issue. In terms of how we quantify data in the EQI, it's pretty agnostic to specific like political boundaries. I'm assuming did you mean like gaps
So
in like data around like unincorporated areas and stuff?
yeah, I
Okay.
can give you an example. So for the city of Napa, we have areas that, because of the way they're drawn up, they are city islands, and so they kind of get missed in some data. So that was kind of where my thoughts were on that.
Gotcha.
And then also rural areas that are
Yeah.
still within our community.
Great. Yeah. So for those, we really try to avoid like data sets and analysis that rely on sort of arbitrary, I shouldn't say arbitrary, but political boundaries like city limits. And so We do all our analysis at the census block level, which is a political definition to some extent, but are typically more granular than like city boundaries, and should kind of adjust for that. So, like for example, when we measure access to destinations and traffic exposure and safety and those transportation indicators, those are things where we're just getting like the road network, traffic data, things like that, and doing our own calculations. And we could just as easily do them kind of on any geographic level, and it is very agnostic to like how things are defined spatially, in terms of political boundaries. That being said, one place where it really does matter, and we want to improve the tool, is like how we measure kind of demographic data. So household, low-income communities and tribal lands. Um, on income, it generally does a pretty good job. We use census block group data, but there are places where it's missing. And so we're working on a fix for that for the next version of the tool, where it essentially starts at like, places where there's really granular low income data. It defines those communities in that granular way. And then places where there's data missing and stuff, it kind of goes up a level, and does the definition. And so that we kind of can strike a balance between spatial granularity and covering a lot of places. Um, and same with tribal lands. I mean, we just automatically include communities that are located or intersect with tribal land boundaries. Um, but that's the definition we use. So does that answer that question, or is there anything else we want to maybe talk about
Um,
there?
yeah, it definitely identifies kind of the obvious low-hanging fruit.
Mhm.
But I guess some diving a little bit deeper is that there's overlapping tribal lands, like multiple tribes in one area. There's um, recognized tribes that aren't, they don't have federal recognition.
Mhm.
And but finding ways that we can still capture that,
Sure.
especially as there are more efforts of like stewardship and collaboration and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, in terms of like places where there's overlap, and this sort of gets to I think a question that maybe was posed that we might be addressing later. But unlike some other equity tools like Cal and VirusScreen, EQI very much functions as kind of a yes or no screening tool. And so places where there's like overlap would just be captured already, and there wouldn't necessarily be like, um, I mean, there could be additional consideration given to that, in your own analysis, but it would show up in the tool, like the data would be captured, but in terms of like, um, if a community is screened or not, it wouldn't really make a difference. Um, and then I would say with like uncaptured places that aren't officially, designated, we've looked at different definitions and are certainly open to including other ones, in our update. We already do, though, look at low income. And so typically, the low income definition we use, again, which is consistent with AB 1550 from CARB, it includes a lot of places, because it is regionally specific. And so it's pretty uncommon to find places that aren't like the places that aren't included in those definitions typically are very high income. So it kind of at that point raises the question of how we treat those. But we can do a crosswalk, with some of those other tribal land definitions to make sure places aren't being excluded.
Thank you.
And then I know you had a few other questions in there that we'd be happy to get to, but also for the sake of time, if there's any other questions, we could get to those as well. I'll leave it up to you, Macy.
Yeah. I think if there is no other thoughts on this question, we can move on. But to the point that Carrie mentioned, if there is any some sort of like document or website that um, those like location or tribes that you just mentioned, if there is anything that we can just look through, I'd be happy to just look at those definitions. And as Henry mentioned, we can do a crosswalk between our definitions on those.
Thank you all. I would say land preservation, like cultural conservancy, nature conservancy, um, SF estuary, they may have cross data in GIS already. And then my only other question was for mobility issues, and then I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the mobility issue one, this was tricky, and it's one we put a lot of thought and kind of work into in the initial development of the tool. Again, from like a very just technical perspective on how we treat it in like a quantitative GIS sort of framework, the way we approached it was there's a lot of indicators that we did not include in the tool, including data on mobility needs, lots of other demographic indicators, things that in some cases are captured in other tools, but in some cases aren't. What we found is that since kind of the framework of the tool isn't adding a bunch of things together into one sort of score, it's really just a yes or no screening, including that very broad low income indicator really captures a lot. And so, for example, we looked at a few different indicators. Three that come to mind were mobility needs from the census, English as a second language or limited English proficiency, and then educational attainment were three that we looked into very seriously. And what we found is that they overlap quite a bit with that low income indicator, and so places that aren't already captured by that are low income communities that meet some sort of reasonable threshold for any of these other indicators. There's just not that many of them, and then you kind of run into another issue where you're including fairly high income places in the tool, and that created some issues. So with I'll give an example on the mobility needs one, of kind of how we're trying to address that, of just looking at census data on that in the framework of EQI. When we tried it, didn't really make a lot of sense. We didn't think, at least, but like one big data gap that we have is when we measure access to destinations, we need to be measuring access to destinations effectively for people with mobility needs. And there's frankly just a lot of data gaps right now in terms of how that works, both with for example, how non-fixed route like paratransit is captured in the GTFS data, or just the data standard for how we measure, for how just the industry basically measures transit access is one, as well as like the presence of sidewalks. And so you can think of one good use case for EQI is where to prioritize sidewalk improvements and those types of that type of infrastructure. And so we're actually working on a research project in sustainability right now on like using aerial imagery to identify where those sidewalk gaps are, and actually build a routable sidewalk network that can be used for access analysis. And so I'd say there's a lot of like places within the EQI framework and the analysis where we need to make a lot of improvements for properly doing analysis for folks with mobility needs. And we're working on those.
Thank you so much. That's really thoughtful and encouraging.
All right. So I'll move on to the next question here. So when making significant decisions such as policies, programs, or resource allocation, what equity considerations are most important to your work, and how might EQI help make those factors more visible or measurable? In another word, how might you, in your professional capacity or as a community member, use a tool like the Equity Index to inform decisions, advocacy, or project prioritization? Any thoughts on the second question? Yes, Martha, please.
Yes. So going back to the first part of what I had said is just like when I work with community members, it's really having that, understanding at a basal level where they can actually have a tool like this and say, look, this is why they did this project. This is the reasoning behind it. And here's the process. So for me, it's really important to be able to have graphs, colors, hands-on again, opportunities for folks to be able to click and kind of manipulate what could be a situation, why this sector or a corridor was given priority, and as to what decisions were made. Because I think that the biggest impact that transportation has on community is the decisions that they make and not giving community enough time to really kind of respond or catch up to those decisions. And even before those decisions are made, given an opportunity to voice some of those needs in those communities or those corridors. So it's really important to be able to present and be able to use this tool, if I were to use it, in a way that it could be, I guess, easily used. There's not a lot of there are more icons that are kind of understanding, like this is what you press to get to this result, and to see how a community is built. How is a bridge built, or how is infrastructure put in? What are the considerations, the process? How are these statistics being used to weigh in on the decision for the said projects? And maybe even like how you're discussing all of this, and even when I'm thinking about Carrie and her comments, which are very succinct with a lot of the things that happen in just our communities, is that we see things are growing, but we don't see that there's enough infrastructure being brought in to support how things are growing. And it kind of marginalizes people that are not connected to those corridors. So where was the value or the consideration taken in for those said communities that didn't receive that infrastructure? What was the decision? What were the factors? So I think building a clear picture in the data and in the way you present the data in this tool would be of benefit for those that are not as familiar with some of these technical aspects.
Smart. I think those are great points, and I think we can. So right now we are working on developing a step-by-step user guide for the tool. Maybe in that like guidance, we can add more graphics, and as we improve the tool, we can, add those features to the tool as well, so that it's more user-friendly and like visually more understandable for the users.
And I think that's just the approach you have to take when you're working with community, is really kind of stepping out of your own expertise and saying, let's say I don't know anything and I'm just coming into this blindly or cold. How would I allow space for someone to come in and use this tool and feel comfortable using this tool, right? So an
Yeah.
introductory, when they click onto the tool, automatically you have like a walkthrough that a person could like watch a quick second. You're about to participate. We're really excited that you're here. This is a tool designed for this and this. However, we get responses from other folks that they've used it for this and this. So kind of just opening the idea that it's not regimented, that it's flexible, and that is important too, because that gives the person a feeling of belonging, a feeling of being wanted to be in this space, to understand how these principles are being used and how they're being employed. So yeah, thank you for
Got
that
it.
question.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Naomi, please.
Thank you. Um, Sorry, can you hear me okay? Or is there an echo?
Oh, there is
We
not,
can hear
there is
you.
no.
So I think that kind of to build on what Martha was talking about, really trying to center a community perspective when developing or modifying or using tools like this. People and communities and cities and regions, don't experience equity challenges in sector silos. So people, who may be like experiencing transportation issues may also be experiencing housing issues or climate adaptation issues, and they're all kind of related to each other. Uh, Economic opportunities and where and how people access them is very much related to transportation, housing and land use. Everything is sort of is tied together from the user perspective. But of course, a lot of the way that our sectors are divided is very specific or subject specific so that you have expertise and specialists kind of working on these things. But where that then exists is the coordination across different sectors and agencies, so that what the community is experiencing is more about what their lived experience is versus talk to this person about transportation, you can talk to this person about housing, you can talk to this person about jobs or education. And so to bring it back to this question, I think the big blue sky challenge for a lot of equity tools is how does this transportation index support the other issues and burdens that communities may experience that are related to transportation, but not in the transportation sector? And so can tools like this also consider things like, are there affordable housing goals or requirements in this jurisdiction? Or, what is the what is the rate of super commutes in this community because there aren't any affordable housing / economic opportunities in the same place. So I think that's obviously, version, 8, 9.0, whatever, of this. I think to think about that as a sort of, aspirational or long-term goal where these tools can eventually get to, as methodologies get developed, as data gets refreshed, and as coordination, gets strengthened or more intentionally established between different sectors, then these tools can kind of keep up and provide analysis capacity or resources for what is hopefully a more coordinated understanding and assessment of what people's actual point where it can apply across multiple sectors. And then a sort of more detailed and focused question or consideration here is a little bit related to what Henry was talking about before, where it's hard to really, we don't have, I think, as an industry, of really strong, consistent, usable data to understand access constraints for people with different abilities or for different types of transportation projects, because transportation is such a dynamic, has a dynamic nature. People are moving. Is a lot of value for geographic analysis, but that tends to be static. And so to me, I think, again, looking ahead,
Naomi, I think your audio cut out for a second.
pressures that people traveling have for those origins and destinations, and identifying what data and sources can be utilized to better measure access. That was a lot, but I think these are kind of the big picture questions. We have geographic-based equity tools, and I think the industry is well positioned to start looking forward and ahead of how geographic-based tools can be evolved into more dynamic-based tools.
Thanks, Naomi. I have like one, I guess, response to that, or just maybe question for the group. That there's a lot of different places we could go with the tool. In terms of potential improvements we could make, additional data sets we could add, lots of things we just want to make better. And as we get into more of those things, there is a tension that arises, that I think we dealt with a lot when the tool was initially being developed. Of you know there are kind of a few different competing, in some cases, use cases of the tool. One of which is like stuff we kind of talked about in this presentation, like CSIS, like very narrowly focused, helping Caltrans prioritize projects in a very quantitative way. And then there's other use cases in terms of making the tool broadly applicable to communities, local partners, and kind of really using it to tell a story, in addition to having it just be a number or something. And so I the reason I say they are in conflict in some cases is because the more rigid approach we take with like CSIS doesn't always tell the full story, and there are definitely limitations there. But then, if you apply to approach a more broad kind of holistic approach to something like CSIS, you then in some ways kind of lose the usefulness of it. If there are ways to kind of get a good, like tell the full story in every case with every project, and there aren't sort of guardrails around how you define scores and stuff like that, it becomes a lot more difficult to prioritize projects at a statewide level, like we do with CSIS. And so I think like one way we've kind of thought about approaching this at least is, we do want to always maintain some version of EQI that is pretty simple and quantitative and like has the policy around it in terms of how we prioritize projects and stuff like that. But then also have this version of it or kind of some sort of platform that, has a lot of additional data, a lot of, ways to interact with it and stuff that is more supportive of kind of the storytelling and additional data and quantitative decision making as well. But it's just a general kind of, uh, tool to perform data analysis around projects without having to be as rigid of like specific indicators or thresholds of significance or anything like that, any of the things that we currently have in EQI. So maybe that contradiction is a little bit more, maybe I'm overstating it. I don't know. I think that's just something we've dealt with and kind of tried to at least be intentional about considering. And so just wanted to bring that up. But at least we are pretty committed, I think, to providing the additional data and support as needed, um, even if it's not like the exact EQI definition.
Right. Thanks, Henry. Those are great points. And I think we should, as you mentioned, we should be intentional and try to make balance between the two, perspective of using the tool, basically. Is there any thoughts or comments for this question? If not, I can move on to next. So next question, how can Caltrans make this tool easier for non-technical users, like community organizations or local advocates to apply in their own work? I think we kind of touched this before, but is there any other thoughts on this question? If not, we can move on. Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a thought about community-based organizations. If you do like an outreach and see, what are some of their needs, and then just have like how Martha was mentioning, like a drop-down feature, just like some points that are frequently asked that are easy to go to, so they don't have to try to understand what the system is, and maybe even offering a workshop. So that people become familiar with it and see how it can help in their advocacy or fundraising efforts.
Yeah, good points. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? All right. Next, is there a benefit to requiring the use of EQI in certain funding programs or local project prioritization? What would be needed in order for requirement like that to be successful? Like you can think of like Calimero screen right now is required in some programs. Yes, Carrie, please.
I think that making it a requirement is very intimidating, especially to Indigenous people and our vulnerable communities specifically, because they're already, feeling overwhelmed with other restrictions. So I think just knowing that it's a resource to be available to guide rather than enforcing it would be helpful.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I was thinking of the like workforce investment perspective. I think that sometimes that when we create these tools, we miss out on the value of our youth, and being able to have like youth utilize this tool and kind of have like a practice kind of thing. It's good to have all the technical information, but it'd be really nice to have something where they could actually go in and create a project and really understand and maybe questions that would like say, well, why did you decide to do that? What was the reason behind your project in that corridor? Or this is an actual project. What would you do different? It creates imagination, it also creates solutions, and it also offers opportunity for youth to engage in radical imagination and understanding how they could possibly see themselves in these types of jobs or settings. So I always say that we should make room or say hold space for that imaginative portion of what we do. Your work is critical in the outcomes for our communities, and the data that's acquiesced is so important to introduce that concept at an early age. And youth, children are often not given that opportunity. So I'm saying like the last hurrah would be youth centered to allow them to see how their story or their disparity and the relative correlation between that disparity, how it had a quantitative outcome, and that's really I think is like the responsibility of us also in what we do, and even in engineering or anything. I would want to believe that there would be some room for that creative opportunity to embed that and give workforce investment, youth, a what if, and this is your chance to try it out.
Yeah, great points. Thank you. Naomi?
To Akimi's point about requirements being a barrier, I think this is just sort of tied to what is the value add that the ECI would bring to either funding programs or prioritization decisions, and how is that understood by everybody that would need to use it or that could benefit from using it if that understanding was really clear. Um, I think it's also just understanding what could some processes be to tool outside of Caltrans's deliberative processes and be applied to other programs. So I think it's an important question to ask about requiring, but I also think there are questions to be answered even before getting to the decision of whether it should be a requirement or not. And a lot of it is around like the user understanding the value or the benefit or the impact of the tool to benefit communities, so that eventually, if it ever comes to become a requirement, there's a really strong understanding of why this requirement is a value add. Um, so I think it's more that there are questions before determining if it should be a requirement that need to be answered before the requirement question.
Good point.
Good point. That makes totally sense. And right now, we are kind of following the same, path here in Caltrans. We are trying to just, introduce using EQI first and what sort of value it is going to be added into, just, in any projects that we are working right now. And then, hopefully in the future, we can think of making required using the tool. Um, any other thoughts or comments? Hearing none, I'm moving to the final question. Are there local or regional tools you already use? Like for example, Healthy Place Index, Carry Screen, Local Equity Maps. How could the EQI complement or improve upon those? Yes, Naomi, go ahead, please.
So I think it would be helpful, again, kind of to my previous comment, to understand what the EQI measures that Cal Enviro Screen doesn't. vice versa. And same for these other resources like Healthy Places Index. And, again, there's a lot of equity maps out there. And so just understanding, like I recently had to cell phone and then they of course asked me to change my plan, but it's very easy. They sort of give you this plan will give you this, but not that. And this other plan will give you this, but not that. So I think just being able to understand what role the EQI plays in this larger ecosystem of equity maps and what unique information or benefit it can bring to that ecosystem is helpful to understand.
Yeah, I think Henry is ready to talk about of the like those comparison between the EQI and other tools. Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, I will say um, the EQI documentation on the website. Let's see which table it is. Table Appendix 6-1. Comparison of indicators across equity screening tools kind of gets at this at a very granular level. And so we didn't compare all the tools, and this was done kind of at a point in time, I think in 2023. So it's Count BioScreen, Justice 40, the Federal Justice 40 tool, which was a big tool at the time, and then EQI. So it doesn't include Healthy Places Index and a few others. But we go through sort of indicator by indicator, comparing, which ones are included and which ones aren't. So I'm not going to go through that whole thing now, but I would encourage folks to check it out, and we can certainly, if it's useful, update that to include, all the other tools. I would say though, beyond, yeah.
I would think that it'd be really important to have Berkeley's Safe Track included in
Yep.
that. I'm kind of like sad that you didn't have that because I was looking for it and I thought, wait a minute, it's not even in there. So the real story is also what didn't happen, and Safe Track has been really good about recording near misses, the accidents that were maybe not reported, but did happen. And that is important because many times I think that we wait for something bad to happen before it can happen, and near misses kind of give an indicator of possible outcomes or the potential for those risks. And I think that that's important to embed in that because then you could see the layers behind the picture. Here we have a corridor that maybe is not included in a priority. However, if we look and pull back the layers, there are potential risk factors that have indicated a possibility for said outcomes. And I think that if we show that we considered that we valued that, or maybe a project includes a change in infrastructure because of said information, I think that that's critical because the community has a different perspective often than the institutions, clearly because they live in those corridors. They're driving in those spaces. They're, moving and grooving in those spaces. And for folks outside to say it's not a potential risk and they live it, or they're having to walk that space or move in that space, it's important for us to look at all aspects. And that near miss portion and the information that's collected through SafeTrack I think is really important.
Martha, so we use SafeTrack data in EQI, but I don't think it's what you're referring to. We use Tim's data. Are you referring to, is it Street Story or is it a different?
The street story. Yeah, the
Okay,
street
great.
story. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. So what I think we can do is, update this table to include just more tools like that. In some cases, like we tried to limit it to basically comparable tools in the sense of things that were kind of operationalized at state scale and, worked in a somewhat similar way. So I think we could certainly go beyond that and include tools that maybe that are locally focused or sort of have these different
Perspectives.
perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, and just be really clear in our kind of one of the things we did in the table and the document was have notes on like why we didn't include a certain indicator, so we
And
could be
that's
really clear
important.
about like, for example, like I'm thinking, some of the near miss stuff is like that's an indicator we really would love to include, but it's not available everywhere. Like it's available some places and we'd want to use it, but we do have to kind of be intentional about, unfortunately, it is a limit of the tool, and developing something kind of at statewide scale is what's available.
So
And
when
so
you're
we can at least be
asking,
clear about.
yeah, and so when you're asking for jurisdictions to be able to provide that information, I think that that's important to also have that, non-conventional. Do you have any data that you're using to create your argument for said project? And that I think like when they're scoring, if they have that extra information and it's a valid, like it's not just subjective, but I mean, actual reference point that they can use, I think that you should give them more points for that because they're actually trying to create an argument for the need for said project.
Sure.
And oftentimes we only have a limited amount of information, but if we are able to use that type of data and create that argument and you accept it as valid, or you're looking at certain criteria that is not accepted, then it buffers or mitigates a loss for that community to make the argument for that project. But if you take it on a perspective like, and if you include extra data, or if you can find information that will support your argument, whether it's even if it's not in our immediate purview and it's factual, then we can use that. And I think that allows a little bit more equity built into those projects.
Mm.
Yeah, all good points. Thank you so much for sharing. Any other thoughts or comments? All right. With that, our presentation ends here. And again, I apologize for my voice and thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and comments. These are really valuable for us moving forward with the AQI. With
Thank
that, I'll
you.
hand it back. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just thank you for your presentation. Thank you.
Sure, of course. Our pleasure. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to Naomi or Camille.
Yeah, echoing thank you to you, Macy and Henry, for this presentation and also for answering all of our many questions and comments. Appreciate staff's expertise and time on this.
Of course.
So I believe we still are not at quorum for the subcommittee. So that brings us to the end of our data implementation subcommittee. Will reconvene next in early 2026. A discussion of the equity index use cases and other topics in data for Caltrans, UTC, and CalSTA.
Thank you,
With
Naomi.
I am ready to close out the meeting unless there are any other comments from staff or committee members.
I just wanted to say thank you, Chair, for guiding us through this and great job. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Naomi. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great
Everyone.
day.